Welcome to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of this podcast where I feature experts in the D2C industry sharing strategies on how to scale your business and achieve your goals. I'm excited about the guest that I have here today, Nevin Jethmalani. He is the founder of Data Dish. He's been working in e-commerce for the last 10 years. He's worked with brands ranging from Dr. Brandt and Jamie Foxx's eyewear brand to smaller, more niche brands like Tusk, which is a leather goods brand. He started a data analytics company which builds custom reports and helps with data visualization at a fraction of the cost most agencies charge. And we met each other, Nevin, because you reached out for help with ads, listened to me on a podcast, thought we had a really good perspective on what ads we should do. And I was trying to remember, do you know which podcast it was? Was that Kurt Elster's podcast, the Unofficial Shopify podcast?
Yeah, it was. It's Kurt Elster's podcast. And I think what really hooked me was the way that you looked at MER, because a lot of ad experts these days just look at in-platform ROAS. And I feel like these days, Facebook and Google are trying to take credit for as much as they possibly can so that people just spend more and more money with them. And looking at it from an MER point of view just made total sense. And that's kind of the direction. Yeah, exactly. Like any extra dollar that you spend, you need to see it extra dollar in total revenue, not just extra dollar attributed revenue.
Yes, we talk a lot about the difference between attributed ROAS versus actual ROAS as well. And so, yeah, that podcast was the ROAS Death Spiral. I'll link to that in the comments too, if anybody wants to go check out that episode. It was a really fun one. I actually flew out to Chicago and did that one live with him, which was pretty cool too.
Oh, nice. I think there's also an article that goes along with it.
Yes, there is. I can link to that article as well.
Yeah. That was
So,
super interesting.
I want to get into the backstory. Before I do, I want to just quickly announce our sponsorship here. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million. And we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. That said, on to the fun stuff. Nevin, how did you get into doing what you do?
Yeah. So I started a small company in the e-com space, ended up running e-commerce for one of my clients, and ran e-commerce in-house for, I think it was a couple of years, learned a lot, grew that brand, and just figured, hey, I could apply the same techniques that I'm using for this one brand to multiple different brands. So basically got into e-com consulting that way. Started working with a couple different brands, and my business grows exclusively through word of mouth. So, people said good things about me, spoke to me, were interested, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And then one of the big pain points that I saw while consulting for brands was that management teams had no real insight into data, right? Like either they had these robust data warehouses and like no clear management or clear dashboard built on top of them, or they didn't even have any infrastructure, right? Like there was nothing, no reporting. They were pulling reports from Shopify, pulling reports from Facebook and like merging them together using Excel spreadsheets. And it was a nightmare. Anytime you wanted to pull any data, it would take you like hours. So basically started a company that would create these dashboards for management teams. And then obviously those obviously those dashboards can be applied for, any level of the company. So if there was an affiliate dashboard we needed to build for an affiliate manager, we could do that.
Well, I think that's the key, right? There's a lot of data out there. We have more data than we know what to do with. And I think about this very often about like the next version of the Renaissance. And so when we think about the Renaissance, there was this explosion of people that had access to books that maybe didn't have access to all of this knowledge. And it created this just incredible time of learning and growth and development. But I think one of the things that's interesting about the explosion of data here, let's just say recently, is that it almost creates sometimes more paralysis than it does anything else as far as making decisions. And oftentimes because people are looking at incomplete data, wrong data, or, disparate data sources, and they're not able to pull it all together, kind of like what you were describing. And one of the things that you talked about was, you told me like, make it transparent to the entire team. What do you mean by making it transparent to the entire team? And how does that help e-commerce businesses?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a big believer in communication, right? Like when I go into companies and there are silos in those companies, I feel like that's a huge area of opportunity, right? Because different people have different ideas, and getting them to all talk to each other means that, ideas can be bounced off one another, right? So say, for example, you've got a PR manager who's working in a silo from an affiliate manager who's working in a silo from a social media manager and influencer manager, right? Like having those people sit down in the same room and just say, hey, why don't we coordinate on which influencers we're going to talk to? Maybe the influencer person doesn't have as much of a budget, but the PR team has a bit of a budget, an extra budget to send gifts to. But the influencer person, has a bunch of people that they want to send gifts to, but can't because of budget limitations, right? Getting these three people in a room together allows them to bounce ideas off of each other. I think that's huge.
Yeah. And I've seen
so
this.
basically being transparent with like data around, what the total goals of the company are, and achieving those total goals allows people to just say, hey, maybe we can try this, maybe we can try that.
Yep. And I've seen this with a couple of brands, the idea of information silos. There's two examples that really jump out at me, and maybe people have heard me say this before, but I'll repeat them just in case. One was a brand that essentially said they wanted to double their business month over month. They, were really excited about they're going to double their budget. This was a really good thing. And, if we were just a normal agency, we would have just taken the money and ran with it and had a really good time with it, and then ended up with the month at a really bad spot because thankfully we're the team who also looks at inventory. And we said, wait a minute, though. How much inventory do you have? And they said, well, we've only ordered 50% more inventory. And it's like, well, you can't double the business now unless there's something else that's going to change along these lines. Maybe you're doubling your prices then too. But like there's, you're going to be very disappointed. And that was in their case, their marketing team and their inventory team, they weren't communicating. Now we were talking to both teams, so we were able to see that gap, but eliminating that. And the other time, I feel like there's oftentimes a lack of communication between the marketing teams and the finance teams as well, where there could be some significantly different goals that are happening there. And I think that being able to, like you said, eliminate those silos in information allows for much better, more thoughtful, intelligent decision making across the board for teams.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then the other thing that's super important is a lot of this stuff is not necessarily like creating dashboards is great, but if you don't have, notifications going out when certain metrics are hit, or, like messages going out when inventories are low, things like that, you're screwed because you don't have data information flowing properly. Like everyone is not going to check a dashboard every day, right? Like if there's an e-com dashboard, the inventory team is not going to be checking that every day. Like that's crazy. They've got better things to do. So you need to make sure that you're informing those teams at, the right time.
What are some of those metrics that you would say are at the top of the food pyramid, if you would, of ones that should be sent notifications? If this happens, these are like, these 5 or 3 or whatever, absolutely should be getting notifications for.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a hard question, right? Because it's so different for every business, right? Like if you're a venture capital backed startup that doesn't really care about costs, right? All you care about is acquiring new customers and doing so at a total blended CAC of XYZ based on ad spend, right? Then your metrics are going to be one thing. Whereas if you're a business that's a legacy business trying to, have 30% EBITDA margins, then your total metric in terms of CACs and in terms of like daily metrics are just completely different. So I think it really boils down to what your business goals are. I'm working with a brand right now. that has a membership model, and their primary concern is just about how many new members they acquire every day, right? Because that's where they make their profit. But their total order volume is not necessarily the number one metric they look at. Obviously, it's critical, right? Like members need to buy product in order to get value of membership, right? But their primary profit driver is new memberships.
So, to your point, it is going to be different for every business. And maybe it's hard to say what are the ones that need to be on that scorecard, but maybe there are metrics that you could say feel easier to eliminate. Are there metrics that you feel like a lot of people have on their scorecard that you're like, this metric doesn't mean what you think it means, and it frustrates me when brands overly focus on that metric?
Yeah, in platform ROAS.
Yeah, we share that.
I feel like that's a big one. I mean, right, I'm not trying to say that it's completely useless. It has its
Agreed.
value, right? Like it has its value for sure. But what I'm trying to say is that if you're going at a 1.5x ROAS, or sorry, if you're looking at it, like where there is value is that if your campaign is operating at a 0.3 ROAS, right? Like it's fair to assume that that is not profitable regardless of what your MER is, right?
Sure.
Like that is not the way to look at it. But if you're at like a 0.8 ROAS, for example, and you're potentially hoping to get to a 1 or 1.2 in terms of a blended number, that might be feasible, right? So looking at that from an MER point of view is key.
Yeah. And I like that idea there where the biggest difference for me for in-platform and where it has value is in understanding the change from within itself, right? And so if you're humming along nicely, and let's say that you've already done a holdout test. Let's say you ran a geo holdout test and you determined that a 1x ROAS in-platform is the same as a 4x MER and actual real dollars coming along. And we've seen that for some brands. And so, that you're perfectly fine with that. And you say, okay, as long as we're getting a 1x in-platform ROAS, we're good. If that changes directionally from itself and it drops to a 0.5, that should be cause for alarm because that's a change from what it was. If that goes from a 1x to a 2x, it should be a change, cause for alarm to say what has changed in our overall marketing mix, in our AOV, in something. But why is there this change? That's, I'd say, more where it has the value versus the actual number itself.
Yeah, directionally it's key, right? Like if you make a change to a campaign in creative and it directionally increases, that's significant.
Yes.
Because all other variables are stagnant other than the change you made.
Yes. The other metric that I think really bothers me, and again, it has its place, but I feel like it's used incorrectly too often, is repeat purchase rate. There's so much value in understanding the repeat purchase rate, but the way that it's calculated oftentimes in a lot of people's Shopify dashboard is just basically, and I'm drawing a blank on it because I don't use it, but it's something along the lines of like the amount of people that repeat purchased from you that were, or the amount of purchases, let's say that you had 100 purchases, how many of those were repeat buyers versus new customers? And let's say there was, 50% were repeat buyers. The reason why I hate this metric is because it tells you absolutely nothing about whether you did a good job or not this month. Let's say that you doubled your ad spend, and so you got 200 new customers and the same amount of repeat buyers came back, 50, right? Well, now it's going to say your repeat buyer rate was 25% instead of 50%. Is that good or bad? Well, it's neither one. It doesn't tell you anything, but you just see that your repeat buyer rate went from 50% to 25%. You think it's a bad thing, but you had just as many repeat buyers. The difference was you also added on a whole bunch of new customers, and that's a good thing. So you haven't done anything bad to your business.
Oh yeah, I'm 100% with you. In fact, when I come into a company, my goal is to decrease the repeat customer rate, right? Seeing that number increase is not good because that means you're just getting revenue from the same customers that have bought from you before. That's not the goal of most brands. Their goal is to get new customers.
Yes. And so not necessarily saying to decrease the repeat buyer rate, the repeat customer rate, by decreasing the amount of people that are coming back and buying from you. It's just simply saying the average between how many are new versus repeat. That's where there needs to be a change. And you want to see that you're acquiring new customers.
I mean, if you look at any metric, right, look at conversion rate and you look at it in a silo, it's a useless metric, right? Yeah. You cannot look at any number individually. Like look at EBITDA margin, right? I was just having this discussion with another client. And having a 40% EBITDA margin business is great. But when that business is doing $100 a day in revenue, it no longer is great anymore, right?
Sure.
Like,
right.
Would you rather have a $1 million business doing 10% EBITDA margins, or would you rather have a $100,000 business doing 40% EBITDA margins? Right? Like, looking at any metric in a silo makes no sense to me.
Yeah. And I've equated this oftentimes to an X-ray where if you break your wrist, they're going to look at, the front view, the side view. They're looking at a couple of different views to understand the full break. And if they look at just one of those views, they will not correctly treat the break in your bone. And it's the same thing with data, that oftentimes we try to flatten data out too much and we miss the full story of what's going on there. And to your point,
but then,
yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'll say is that like there's a sweet spot, right? Like there's some people that do this, that is one extreme. Then there's some people that take the other extreme and look at 1,000 data points and try to overanalyze things, exactly what you were talking about at the beginning,
Yes.
right? And that's also not the answer, right? There is a sweet spot in the middle, a dashboard from management teams that includes like maybe 5 or so metrics that they want to optimize for, that once those metrics are in balance, the goal of the business is met. Right?
Yeah.
So getting to those 5 metrics at the brand is the first step in running any successful business, right? Like you need to determine, okay, what are these numbers or what are these goals that we're optimizing for? And then you build the strategy around optimizing for those goals.
Yeah. And I think you and I both really like MER. MER is at the top of our list for various reasons. That's typically not true for every single business, but it's a really good level set one. And I think the way you worded it that I appreciate it is, if you spend another dollar, there needs to be another dollar incremental in actual real revenue, not just in platform ROAS. And then the other really good one along those lines is the actual amount of ad spend, where if this number changes in any significant way, as long as MER stays where it needs to be, you're at a good spot. But if you're not tracking, how much is being spent, to your point, where it's like, great, if you've got an MER goes from a 5x to a 10x, but you decreased the amount that spend, by half there, or significantly more than that, you're in a spot where, okay, well, now maybe the brand is in trouble because the overall EBITDA margin across in aggregate maybe is not very healthy.
Well, I think it's, again, MER is no exception to this rule of looking at data in silo, right? Like if you are if your MER is a 5, for example, right? Or a 4 or whatever it might be. Now you want to try to try to have a prospecting campaign that's running at a 4x ROAS, which would be technically the same MER. That's for most brands, it's not feasible, right? Like, yes, of course, third-party retailers, things like that can acquire customers at those rates, but in most cases, that's not feasible for like a normal D2C brand. So now when you're looking at incremental revenue, you've got to look at a different metric of, hey, yes, my MER at $1 million a month in revenue is X. But if I'm looking to do 1.5 million in revenue, I may need to spend $400,000 to do that $500,000, which is still okay because on that $400K, you're still making money at the bottom line.
Right. And that's the key, is figuring out whether or not you're making it on the bottom line as opposed to just the top line, which I think a lot of people focus too much on the top and they miss out on whether or not that's beneficial to the business. What about
these days?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the one last thing. These days, cash is not flowing for e-com businesses through VC as it used to, right? So if you're not profitable, it's really, really tough to raise. Yeah.
And that's not just true in e-com, but that's in SaaS as well. And I'll say, depending on when this actually goes live here, SaaS, I want to say it was Jason Lemkin maybe just shared something out on LinkedIn this morning that I appreciated, talking about how essentially the SaaS equivalent of, let's say, AOV, just for our e-commerce people here, was down very significantly, 25% or something like that. And I'm actually seeing the same thing true for a lot of e-commerce brands right now. AOV is down. It's not true across every brand, but I'm seeing this on a number right now. And some of the reasons why I'm seeing this, or at least why I suppose we may be seeing this right now, is people buying, let's just say, the cheaper priced options, or they're buying the sale or discount items, or they're maybe adding less to their cart. And so there's a number of things that may be causing this. And I'm seeing that CAC has stayed the same. For a lot of brands, CAC's fine. But for a lot of brands, because of that AOV, that MER number is changing. And that's where you have to look at that and you say, okay, well, why was the MER changing and AOV is down? Why is AOV down? Maybe it's because people are spending a little bit less than they were before. And so you maybe are still acquiring customers the same, maybe still getting the same amount back. They're not spending as much as they were. That can change the significance of what's going on too.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how much of that is attributed to discounting as well.
Well, and that's one thing that we don't like too much. We try to push away from discounting too much because I do think that's it can get into a downside with people, but sometimes there's necessities, and some brands it's almost baked into the brand as a whole. And so, if you didn't, you can't operate the brand.
I mean, it's kind of like a drug, right? It works well, and then it's hard to get off of it.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk about some low-hanging fruit, some of the things that you found that people are doing that are interesting in e-commerce. You were talking about, maybe the product is phenomenal, but maybe somebody's not tracking it very well, sending the data through Google and Facebook. What are some of those things that you were seeing on that from a low hanging fruit, and like where you're trying to help brands out that are, just kind of getting into things?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of your bread and butter, right? Like the data piece, making sure that we're sending enough indicators to Facebook and Google. I think that's huge. One thing that a lot of brands miss is that they may just use the native pixel for Facebook and Google, but that misses out on a lot of data points, right? These days, the industry is trending towards server-side tracking and making sure that you're sending all your data to Facebook, because the new Advantage Plus and Performance Max campaign types are primarily leveraging data to optimize audiences and optimize ad creative, right? And if you're not sending enough data to Facebook and Google, then you're kind of just missing out on some of the opportunities that there are.
Yeah.
And these days with like, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and not just missing out on attribution, which I think I've heard some people push back. They're like, well, it's okay, we don't use in-platform ROAS that much, right? So they're okay with it. But you're actually missing out on the algorithm's ability to understand if it did the right thing or not, so it can make continually better decisions as it moves forward too.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even talking about attribution. I was talking about exactly that. Yeah.
Yes. I wanted to clarify for everybody else.
No. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, for sure. Like you're missing out on total revenue, not attributed revenue, because the platforms make decisions. The AI makes decisions based off of the data that you send it. Like these are just big data processing models, right? Like that's all they do. They process huge troughs of data. So the more you give them, the better they do.
Absolutely. And they have been trained now over trillions and trillions of data points. I don't know exactly what number, but like lots of data points over the years here to where, it's very effective if you give it the data and the right data. And one of those being the amount of data that you're sending it based on. So here's one that I don't know if everybody knows that we really like, which is how can, if you're focused on EBITDA, how can Google, for instance, how can Google align with your goal of EBITDA if you're not sharing that with Google? And so one of the things that we do for some brands is we actually will send in, the EBITDA margin or the specific profit margin that somebody is sending through per product. So that way now Google has the ability, instead of optimizing towards the top line revenue, to optimize towards what's driving the most profit per purchase on these things. And that can make a significant difference in a company's bottom line, maybe without touching the top line. And in some cases, maybe lowering top line revenue, but having a bigger impact on bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. I think you can even upload COGS to Google now. And it's just so much stuff that you can put in these days to help it optimize.
What are some other things that you would say are low hanging fruit when you come into working with a new brand that you haven't worked with? Things that you say, I can almost guarantee that they are not doing this, or they are doing this, but they're doing it incorrectly, that can make a big difference?
It varies so much by brand. There's certain brands that have just, they've hired certain members of their team that, are very good at that specific thing, but then other parts of the team are not built out specifically, right? Like some brands will do a killer job at email, right? They'll know exactly what they're doing. That team is just a well-oiled machine. But then you look at their influencer team and there's just no real strategy there, right? Like they're just throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. Whereas there's a thinking and methodology behind which influencers to work with, right? I feel like understanding where one thing that I've seen that has helped a lot in the brands that I work with is post-purchase surveys. Mm-hmm. Those are huge. Yeah. In understanding where your customers are coming from and then reinvesting in those areas, right? Like if you see that, yes, you're seeing a lot of traffic come from Facebook, a lot of traffic come from Google, whatever it is, and you reinvest there, sure. But then what about people that are converting based off of influencers, right? They may be attributed to Facebook because Facebook is where they saw the last click and made the purchase, but they actually came in through an influencer. And that influencer could be driving a lot more revenue than you probably expect them to. But following a post-purchase survey analysis, you'll see that, hey, maybe we should run more campaigns with influencer. So looking at some of the data that isn't as obvious and as black and white, I feel is key. And then just going in and seeing, as someone who has a good understanding of e-commerce as a whole, and taking that person's, like just having that person look at the brand and saying, hey, are you following best practices here? Are you following best practices there? And then coming in and saying, hey, we can make some tweaks here, tweaks there. There's a lot of opportunity, basically.
A lot of people like to hate on best practices, and there are some best practices that I don't care for as well. But there's something to be said for saying, well, a circle tends to make a really good design for a wheel. Maybe we'll find a better design for a wheel, but why don't we at least start with the circle, right? And I think that that's one of the things that we can both align on, where it's like, look, these are best practices for a reason. Let's at least start with what we know to be good across thousands of other brands, and then you can iterate and change from there and test and tweak and go from there. But there are certain things. And so are there a couple of best practices that you see not being implemented very well, or that you're like, oh, these are a couple of things that I wish people would pay a little bit more attention to?
I feel like the one thing that I've noticed consistently is that as a brand grows, they feel like they need to spend more on their tools and change their tools to adapt to their new size. When the reality is that the majority of things out there are able to be scaled. Yes. Now, once you go from being $1 million brand to doing $100 million in revenue, do you need to change some things? Yes. But if you're going from 1 to 2 to 4 to 5 to 10, the reality is that the majority of your stack should be able to scale with that growth, assuming that you've implemented the right stack and assuming that you have implemented the right best practices. Right?
Yeah.
Like you have a solid site with a solid theme and a solid developer. That person can help whether they're doing $1 million in sales or $20 million in sales.
Totally. And so, you mentioned the right stack. Are there a couple of tools that you would say, hey, these are my top 3-4 tools that I feel like it's not true for every single brand, but these are some of my absolute favorites?
Yeah. So Shopify is obvious one, right? I actually only work with Shopify brands. Klaviyo is kind of the go-to for email. Elevar is my go-to for data analytics or data layer, right? They just know what they're doing. They're a really good team. Builder is kind of like my landing page builder tool. Yeah. I'm trying to think.
What about a post-purchase survey one? You mentioned post-purchase surveys, and we actually did a really good study on that too. Do you have one that you prefer?
Yeah, Fairing is my go-to. Those guys, okay. I know the founder well, and he is a great guy. And definitely my go-to tool.
So I had Matt Barr on here. He's actually the very first episode, and totally agree with you. Fairing. So one of the things that I really like about Fairing, and we do use other ones as well, but one of the things that I really like about them is they also have the UTM data with that, with the survey data. And I think that allows for a really rich, interesting, like cross-section between those two data points. And what we found is, and I'll have to link to this in there as well, the article that Grace Peach did. I want to say the difference in what was attributed to, let's say, direct traffic versus what people said that they came from, which was like Facebook ads, was off by 80%. It was a significant number of people that were actually saying they came from Facebook, but that's not what it was getting credit for from a UTM perspective. And I think that that's something that we always knew that there was at least some amount that was being missed, but there was a lot more, at least in this particular instance, that was being missed, that if you weren't doing this, you're going to miss out on that data.
Yeah, I think the one thing that this leads into my next point, right? Like the one thing that people that are in this business, they don't put themselves in the shoes of the customer, right? Yeah. Like think about yourself as a customer. When you go and shop and you're looking, maybe not a $10 product, but if you're going to spend $100+ on a product and you see an ad on Facebook, you're not necessarily going to pull the trigger on $100 just right there and then. A lot of people won't, right? Some people obviously will, but a lot of people won't. So if you go and check Facebook a couple times, see their ads a couple times, and then ultimately say, hey, I saw that ad a while ago, but I really need that product right now. How are you going to buy it? You're going to go to Google the product name or Google the product or a brand name, and who's going to take credit for that? Google is, right? Yeah. And Facebook is not going to, they may not get any attributed credit for that purchase, especially if you saw it on your phone and then purchased on your computer, right? Majority of the time, there's going to be no attribution there. So yeah, I mean, post-purchase survey is key. And then the other cool thing that Fairing does is they extrapolate the revenue. So if you did 20% of your revenue through Facebook, it will then extrapolate, but it only collected data on half of that revenue because everyone doesn't fill out the post-purchase survey, then Fairing will extrapolate the revenue so that it shows 40K if only 50% of your purchasers bought.
Which we manually did with them a while ago because of exactly to your point where, if you only if only 50% of people filled out the survey, but this is what was true for those 50%, then you can say, okay, well, we can assume that this is likely, what's missing, this missing attribution piece. And that can make a big difference in making helping people to make an educated guess on where's the next best place to spend this next dollar.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
One of the other things that you and I were talking about was, in addition to the data side, is telling the story from the brand perspective and why that's important and how that can be used. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in the product being the best, right? Like if you're going to sell a product, it has to be phenomenal. There's no question about that. These days in the market, it's kind of a given.
Yeah.
People aren't buying crap anymore. But in addition to that, if you're also going to upcharge them 5 times the cost of manufacturing that product, you need to give them a compelling reason why, right? Like it's pretty clear that a company like Bombas is upcharging, a significant amount for their $12 or $13 pair of socks. Yep. But they've built this product that is just so phenomenal that people are willing to pay it, right? Like their socks are just that much better than the next best thing. And people are willing to spend that money on the socks, right?
Yep.
And it's not because it's, yes, the product is good, but it's not necessarily because the product is good. It's because they've built this brand around something as simple as socks. And the story kind of goes that, there are certain luxuries in life that elevate your life just that little bit, that make that $10 extra on something. Like in the grand scheme of things, the cost may not be significant, but it just elevates your life, right?
Yeah. Nevin is my hero and he makes a great point. I was thinking about even just the idea of a couple of brands that do this very well. One that I like is Illusionist. If you guys don't know who they are, I love magic. And Illusionist does a great job where they elevate, every single one of their products, and you should go check out their product pages, but every single product that they release has like a 2 or 3 minute, just amazing video about that product. And it does help to tell that story about the brand, but as well as about the individual product and taking it to the next level. What other brands do you feel are doing a great job of this? You mentioned Bombas, but who else?
The Always Pan. I think they do a good job in this. Yeah. It is a very expensive product, and at the end of the day, it's pan, right? But they've built a story around this pan, and a lot of it comes from influencer marketing, right? Where it just is one pan to do everything, right? Which is great. It solves a problem, and it's a good product, right?
Well, and if you can go from having to buy, 7 different pans, sure, that pan might be expensive for a pan, but it's a cost savings compared to buying these 7 pans. And I think that's where people say, yeah, it's worth it to buy this one really great pan that can do all of these things that I needed to do. Like you said, it makes your life easier now.
And it saves space, right? Like in the city, there's not, kitchens are small, right? You don't have these mega size suburban kitchens where you can store 7 or 8 different pans. You've got a tiny spot in the top of your cabinet where there's space for 2 pans.
Yes. And you still want to cook well, right? And so you still want quality. One of the things that I was thinking about when it comes to just that idea of everybody wanting to buy, let's say quality, like you said, it has to be the best if you're going to do this. And you mentioned nobody wants to buy crap. I agree with you, except for the idea that I would say there is a lot of people that still want to buy crap. Well, they don't want to buy crap, but there's a lot of people that are willing to experiment with buying crap. They're just not going to do it on the brand side. And this is where it's like they're going to buy that crap from Temu, or maybe to call it somebody else like Wish, right? Like there's a lot of places that they like to go and experiment with, seeing if they can, get away with buying absolute garbage. Not that everything that you buy from those places is garbage, but we've all been in the situation where you ordered something and it's not at all what you ordered when you get that. You're like, what is this?
Yeah.
But so
I mean,
yeah,
the dupe concept is huge.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, to compete as a brand, you have to be willing to show how you stand out from all of those other options, because it's very easy to go to Amazon and buy whatever is the low cost option of that, unless you stand out in some way as being, like you said, marginally better. It doesn't even have to be radically better, but enough to where it's noticeable.
Yeah. And I mean, you do get a lot of revenue from the convenience, right? I was discussing this with someone the other day, and people in the US specifically are just all about convenience, right? Like,
sure,
they don't want to go to Amazon and try 5 different products, one of which may work as well as the main product that, the original product that they're looking for, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm sure people can go to all these platforms, find a dupe, and get a product for a cheaper price. But now, is it worth ordering 3 different items from Amazon, having to return 2 of them to save $30 or $40 or $50, right? Now, where the dupes work really well is on TikTok, when someone vouches for it or makes a video saying, hey, a Lululemon dupe, right? Like, that crushes it, because that's a convenience factor, right? Like, getting to your customers at the right time in the right way, that's the real secret, right? Like, making sure that you're making whatever you're doing, whatever your messaging is adding convenience and time back to someone's life, right? Yes. And luxury back to someone's life. That's how you really figure out e-commerce.
And here's the thing. If the knockoffs can do an exceptional job at doing this on TikTok, there's no excuse for the real brand, the higher quality one, from doing the same thing. The reason why a lot of them don't do it is because I think that they're too scared or too uncomfortable with naive to creating the right TikTok content. You have to be willing to push the brand guidelines just a little bit to say, how do we make this a little bit more the style that people are accustomed to on TikTok?
I think, that's definitely some brands, but some brands just don't have the resources, right? Like, you'll be shocked at some of these larger organizations that don't have someone inside that knows that this is the content that does well on TikTok. Right? Yeah. Like, they don't know the content that works on TikTok, and 2, they don't have a team to actually execute on that. Right? Yeah. Like, they don't have someone to find those influencers and get people to make those videos the way that they're supposed to be made. And then these dupes do well because it's content creators creating them, and those content creators get affiliate revenue. So it's a mutually beneficial situation. And they're getting a crazy amount of engagement in their content because they're producing content that their customers want. Or they're not customers at this point, they're followers.
They're followers, right? Well, those customers to a point, but yes, exactly. Yeah. So how could certain brands, how do they tell the right story? So let's say, for instance, and this happened recently, and I won't say who it was. There's a toothbrush brand that I was asked to look at. And the toothbrush, to me, did not look any different than anything I could find on, Temu, for instance, or Alibaba or whatever. It didn't look anything significant. Even the product imagery did not look any different, but they were priced significantly different from what you were going to find there. I deal on the ad side, and so I don't know how can a brand like that, where can they start to figure out how to level up what they're saying in the marketplace, on their website, stuff like that? Are there resources, tools? Is that something that you handle, or how do you go about helping brands with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about storytelling, and at that point, right? Like, why are you better than the next best thing? Yeah. What problem do you solve that the next best thing can't solve? Right? Like, what are you doing that is so different from the product that you're competing with that people have to, once they come to your page, they're like, I need this in my life, right? Like, you need to solve those questions. Now, if the product isn't good, that's what I said from the very beginning, right? Like, if the product doesn't stand out or have anything unique, it's a tough sell, right? Like, you can story tell as much as you want, but it's going to be an uphill battle always. I'm not saying there aren't brands that have done it, right? Like, there are so many brands that have just created such a brilliant story around such a generic product, but it is an uphill battle, right? And who knows how much profit those brands are bringing in, right? If you throw millions of dollars of venture capital funding at any business, it will grow. Like, Facebook ads work, right? Yes. It's just expensive.
I think one of the things that we have tried to do, at least while we're not necessarily product positioning experts in the idea of like a true positioning, when I think about somebody who really deals with like branding positioning, one of the people my go-to is David Breyer. He wrote a book called Brand Intervention. Damon John wrote the foreword to it. It's an absolutely incredible book. The font is like, I don't know, 50 points. So it looks like a lot bigger book than it really is, but there's a lot of great examples. One of the ways that I try to do this with our team when we're looking through this is, what are people saying about you and about your competitors in your own Facebook ads and their Facebook ads, on Reddit, on other forums? Where do people go on Twitter to basically badmouth your competitors and say all the things they don't like about them? That's your opportunity to figure out, how do you stand out from that? So if it's, hey, design looks great, but the zipper sucks. Okay, great. Oh, zipper. Is our zipper better? If we're using a better zipper, can we make sure that we're calling that out in the ad in a way that shows just how good our zipper is, and not in like a cheesy way or let's just say like an ineffective way, but go all out. If your zipper is the best zipper that exists on the planet, prove it. And there's a phone case company that I really like that does a good job with this. I think it's Mouse. If I remember correctly, and they basically take their iPhone, take it up in a helicopter, drop the iPhone out of the helicopter and show that it's still okay after it lands on the ground. And it's like, that is a very creative way to show that this is a heavy duty, well worth it case. And now you look at the price of whatever it is, $50 or something, you say, that's maybe worth the $50.
Yeah. Exactly.
Versus just saying with like a little bullet point, like, hey, 25% carbon shell fiber, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, all right, that's fine. Just prove it. Put it on the helicopter and throw it out the window.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is definitely like a big example, right? Like for sure that I can see that working, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But like it can get so much more simple than that, right? Like have an influencer talk about your product, just saying that they use it all the time, that it's the best product and it's changed their life, right? You get someone to say that, run that on a Facebook ad, and it's hard to say no to that, right? Like, I'll give you an example. I think AG1 has done this well, not perfectly, but well in some of their ad creatives, right? They just have so many people that love the product and that use the product that they create those UGC ads and they show the benefit of the product. They show people actually, expressing their change in lifestyle from the product. And that's what gets them to be so successful. Yeah.
Well, and I think you've said it before to me, remove skepticism, and people will come and they're going to see skepticism on the website. And one of the things is maybe not to be too sensationalist in the idea where it's like, yeah, okay, I've already been duped by that already. How can I know for sure this is real? And that's where I think, the UGC and the influencers can be impactful if they sound much more genuine and they show it in reasonable context, maybe even showing some of the downsides potentially, where it's like, hey, it's great for this, this, and this, not ideal for this. If this is your exact situation, this is not the right one for you, or something along those lines.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like if you are aware that the claim you're making, okay, say for example, you're saying 100% guarantee that this thing works.
Sure.
Okay. But you're not backing it up with anything, right? Now, the customer is going to be skeptical and say, oh yeah, they're just saying 100% guarantee. What happens if they don't guarantee it? Well, then back up your claim, right? Say that you can return the product, right? Say that the product is, 100% effective and you're ready to support that with XYZ case studies or clinical claims, whatever it might be. Just preempt the skepticism is what I would say.
My mentor and good friend, Dave Mortensen, he founded Anytime Fitness. I don't know if you're familiar with the Anytime Fitness brand franchise. One of the things he told me that I should add to our website is basically a quote from somebody who we didn't succeed with. Because we're not going to succeed as an agency with every single client. And there are times where, hey, we didn't succeed, but the particular client that I'm thinking of has sent us numerous leads, numerous referrals, even though we didn't find success for him. And his reason for it is he said, yeah, but I've never found another agency that harder to try to find it, that worked more methodical. Like I know for a fact that you guys did everything that was possible and that it was on our side, that we didn't quite have our product market fit figured out. And so I know that anybody I send to you, they have the best chance of succeeding with you. And it's like, that's a really interesting thing. But to your point, it's like, hey, let's remove skepticism. We've got some really incredible case studies. How about showing a case study where we didn't succeed?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many people have something like that. That's like a really tough thing to get, right?
Sure.
Yeah, like it's a really unique piece of content. If you can generate something like that, then 100% I can see it working.
Right. I want to be respectful of time. We're coming up on the end, and I like to dig into a little bit of the personal side of who is Nevin Jethmalani. And so one of the things we were talking about too is some stories from earlier career. Like what has enabled you to be successful in your role? Were there things that you did early in your career, early in, adult life that has positioned you well?
It's a tough question. I think that one of the core beliefs that I have is building infrastructure, right? Not looking at a relationship as a, hey, bring Nevin on and tomorrow your revenue is going to double, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah, that's an exaggeration, but like, I'm not the guy that's going to come in and, you're not going to see an immediate impact, right? Like there's a long tail approach, right? Building this relationship and storytelling with the customer takes time, and creating that relationship with the customer is something that you only see the effects of later on, right? You see obviously there's some low hanging fruit. Email marketing isn't working. If SMS is not being done, things like that, you can definitely take advantage of in a quicker pace, but like developing the core infrastructure of a site so that you're optimized for site speed, your data is flowing to the right places at the right time. You're sending the right indicators to Google and Facebook, right? Like those things are not going to be, instantaneous winners, right? Yes, you'll see marginal growth from them in the short term, but the real growth that you're going to see is going to be over the long term. And I'm a big believer in that. And that's worked really well for me, right? Like I've worked with brands for 6 months and have seen marginal 10% increases in revenue, but then boom, then that 7th month comes, that 8th month comes, and you're seeing 30, 40, 50% growth. And it's just like, wow, all that work over the last 6 months is finally paying off. It's the best feeling.
Yeah. So your brain, I love the way that it works. And we've talked about this on a number of times before. You're always thinking. You are always thinking. And I can remember times where maybe I've sent you an email back, which I get in trouble from my team for doing sometimes. I blame it on being, the CEO at like midnight or something. And it's like, oh, sending this email out real quick. And you respond. And I'm like, why did you just respond? We shouldn't have responded. But your brain is always going, what are some things that you do to wind down? Like, or what are some things you're like, hey, here's how I unwind at the end of the day to like quiet your brain?
I think watching TV is my big thing, but when I'm watching TV, I still have my laptop next to me.
Sure.
I'm still on my phone. So if I get an email and it's like some mindless show, I'll still pick up my laptop, pick up my phone and respond, right? It's kind of like, well, I've got to do it tomorrow anyways. Might as well just get out of the way now. And honestly, like I feel at much more ease when my inbox, I use Superhuman. So my inbox is always at 0. So I feel at much more ease when there's nothing in my inbox like immediately that I need to do, because otherwise I know I've got to wake up the next morning and that's going to be pending.
I completely relate to that. What shows though? What's your mindless show that you can watch, or one that you're just like, nah, when this one's on though, I'm not very good at being able to respond. I need to watch this one, or maybe there isn't one like that.
Yeah, I'm rewatching Breaking Bad right now.
Yeah,
and that's one of those that I like to focus on because the story is super interesting.
Yeah,
but some of my mindless shows. Oh yeah, it's just such a well-made show. Like everything about it is so well thought out. And then some of my mindless shows like Friends, Big Bang Theory, New Girl. Those are a few of my go-tos.
100% with you on the Big Bang Theory. I don't know if you know this, but I've been referred to as Sheldon Cooper on more than one occasion from completely different people. So, and I don't think they meant it as a compliment, but I am the guy who's like, actually, do you know, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh my gosh, you are Sheldon. My other really good show that I love, if you can't tell here, is Psych. I think it's probably backwards for you. Man, I love that show. And I think the reason why I do like that show is just the playfulness of it. It is very lighthearted, playful, probably similar to Friends, right? It's just good-hearted, easygoing.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't checked it out, but I definitely will.
What about let's say any books or mentors or inspiration? Is there anything along those lines that you're like, hey, this is a good book or website or podcast that you like to kind of glean from and enjoy and learn from?
Yeah. I think in terms of podcasts, as we spoke about earlier, the Kurt Elster's podcast is good. I also listen to the All In podcast. which is more general. It's not necessarily e-com focused, but I think they do a good job in like understanding or putting a good summary together of like how different industries and investing is. I think that the way that investing works makes a lot of sense to any business. So understanding that is key. I think also going back to one of your other questions about like how you started coding is huge for me. Learning to code was like one thing that really changed the way that I look at businesses. And it's just the mentality of a developer, I think, is unique. So that was a big change for me. And then so I like to keep up with anything coding related as well. Anything new in the space, I like to stay up to date on.
Yeah, there's nothing new in that space at all right now, is there? AI is
right? Like nothing
overtaking, and there's a lot where that is its own coding language, if you would, of just making sure that you format the right prompt, to get the answer that you want out of it.
Yeah, I was just at Shop Talk and so much. Yeah, I was just at Shop Talk and there were a bunch of panelists on Shop Talk, and not every time, but a bunch of times AI came up, they were like, there can't be a panel without an AI conversation in this.
And it is
same thing here. Can't have a podcast.
Yeah, you can't. It is omnipresent right now. I got access to Bard, and I asked it some real heavy hitting questions about basically it's like, is a hot dog a sandwich? Is cereal soup? I asked it all of the really most challenging questions in the world, and sent you some interesting answers. It doesn't want to make a choice. That's the one thing is, AI is definitely still a people pleaser. It's like, I want to tell you whatever you want to hear. And it's, I just want your answer.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely is. There's definitely some fine tuning that needs to be done, but the models are insane right now. Like, it's crazy how sophisticated they are and how much they can do.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens a year from now. I think a year from now is when it'll start to get a little bit more interesting. Right now, I think it's still very novel. There are some people doing some interesting things with it, but a lot of this is still, it's not quite where it needs to be hyper useful in a lot of areas, but it's right around the corner. It's in the learning mode. It's like a 3-year-old. It's learning, and you watch. I think the
craziest thing is the rate at which it's changing. Right. Not the current state of it, but the rate at which things are happening is just mind blowing. Yeah. Like, we talk about the way that chips are growing in terms of like how quickly the processor speeds increase. Yeah. This is like 10x that, right?
Yes.
Like, it's just growing so much faster. I still remember months ago when all this stuff came up, there was talk about like an auto GPT, right? A few months later, what do we have? Something that's actually doing that. Right. Yes. And it's crazy. You would expect these innovations over like years of time. And because of the way that this is being built, not necessarily open source, but it's very developer friendly. And because of that, it's just growing so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just scratching the surface of what's going to be capable there. And I think the biggest thing there is going to be determined on the outcome that somebody is intending for it. And I think that's what limits a lot of this is a lot of AI has maybe been programmed with the wrong end goal. But I think that it's going to learn that. And I think the right AIs are going to come out with the right end goal. And an example of this would be a lot of AIs in the ad space are obviously still keyed around, let's say, ROAS, or they're keyed around top line revenue. And so a lot of them miss the underlying EBITDA perspective. But I think that it's just around the corner, and there's a lot of stuff we're doing with that already. But there's a lot of stuff that I think that, it's going to continue to develop. I wanted to ask final question then, as we get into this. I like to ask something silly on every single one of them. And the one that I'm going to do for you here is, you ever play Balderdash? Are you familiar with the game Balderdash, where you have a word and you have to come up with a fake definition for it that sounds believable?
I have not.
Okay.
Do you know what? Just give me 1 second. My battery is dying, so I don't want it to die in the middle.
All good.
Sorry.
So back to the idea of Balderdash, or giving you a word. So I'm going to give you an absolutely random word that you probably don't know the definition of. It's very random. And your goal is to just give us a definition that sounds believable, that you're like, oh, clearly that's this. So your word is...
Testing my acting skills.
Yeah, there you go. Your word is quincunx. I don't know that I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it is spelled Quincunx. Quincunx. What is quincunx, Nevin?
Quincunx is a synonym for a wine bottle. So something that you pour wine into, helps decant the wine and helps store it as well.
I mean, that makes sense. Obviously, that's obviously what it is. For those of you who don't know what it is, neither do I. Please go look it up and tell me what it is and let me know. I actually do know. I've got it pulled up, but I'm not going to tell you. I want you to look it up. Okay. Final thoughts. If there was one piece of information you would share with anybody, and this could be literally anybody, you just have the opportunity to say anything. This could be young entrepreneurs. This could be seasoned vets. What's the piece of final advice that you would give somebody listening in on this podcast?
Yeah, I would say work on a goal-oriented mindset, right? Like, don't worry about what you do to achieve that goal. Try to achieve the goal that you're looking to achieve, opposed to worrying about the journey to get there, right? Like, if you're trying to optimize for revenue growth, right? Like, find a creative and unique solution to get to that point. Don't worry about the journey, right? Like, as long as you get there, that's what's important. Whether there's failures along the way, that's fine. That's part of the journey, right? Just keep that goal in mind. And that's the way I work with all my clients as well, right? Like, I ask them, what is the goal that they're trying to optimize for? What is the key metric that they want to optimize for? And we get to that goal.
And I would almost guarantee that there will be ups and downs on that. And so it's not a linear path. Nevin, if people wanted to follow you, get in touch with you, work with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, just shoot me an email. It's nevin@datadish.io. I'm also available on social. Nevin Jethmalani is my full name. You'll be able to find me on most platforms. I check everything. Don't really use much of them, but I check it all.
I love it.
It'll make its way to me. Yeah, but nevin@datadish.io is the best way.
He will reply at midnight while watching The Big Bang Theory. I'm just kidding.
Yep, exactly.
Well, Nevin, I really appreciate you coming out here today, sharing your knowledge with us, and everybody. I appreciate you chiming in.
It's been an awesome conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great. Thanks.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.